in-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
I'm Bill Dries, reporter for the Daily Memphian, and this is On the Record, a special edition of our podcast to mark the Friday, July 15th start of early voting in Shelby County. That's ahead of the August 4th Election Day, the second election of three in our city in 2022. And the biggest ballot, the longest ballot of any election cycle in Shelby County politics. Now, at DailyMemphian.com, we've got our regular ballot basics feature that walks you through the early voting process, even the difficult-to-navigate tool on the Election Commission's website to find what districts you live in. We've got hyperlinks in the stories to the entire 5-page ballot, all 26 early voting sites and their hours, voter ID requirements by state law, too. In our overview of the big ballot that is paired with ballot basics for the early voter, we've counted this up. And we've got a few numbers, not in the stories, because this is our podcast, and after all, we've got to give you something extra, right? There are 163 races with 344 candidates and one referendum, the Memphis term limits ballot question that in the last few days has taken on new importance with new implications now that Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland has said he will seek a third term if it passes. Anyway, 163 races, 344 candidates. 52 of those races are a single candidate running unopposed, not counting the 26 judicial retention races for the state appellate courts up to and including the Tennessee Supreme Court. Judges and those who want to be judges are what makes the big ballot big because these offices are for 8-year terms. There are 70 of those judicial races, which means they are 43% of the races on the big ballot. Those judicial races have 119 candidates, which accounts for 34.5% of all of the candidates. Again, sticking with the judicial races here, 13 incumbent judges are running unopposed, not counting the retention races. There are 8 open seats on the bench, no incumbent judge seeking re-election in those, and 23 of the races are challenges of incumbent judges. What are you deciding as a voter? That's our middle part here, or what's at stake politically? Here are a few points on that. A hard-fought general election race for District Attorney General between Republican incumbent Amy Wyrick and Democratic challenger Steve Mulroy, that race centering on what reforming the criminal justice system looks like in a city that has a chronic problem with violent crime. There's a competitive challenge of Democratic Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris by Republican Worth Morgan following Harris's resounding victory in May over primary challenger Ken Moody. You'll remember that Moody challenged Harris in the primary along the lines of the plan that Morgan has also outlined for changing the office of county mayor. Of course, this hasn't been about record versus change. Harris has campaigned on things he wants to do in his second term that would also dramatically change the role of the county mayor as we've seen it over the years, but just change it in a different way than Morgan wants to change it. 8 countywide races for clerks and similar offices that saw 3 Democratic incumbents fall to challengers in the May Democratic primaries. Democratic County Clerk Wanda Halbert survived in the May election, but in the interim, complaints have grown about how her office has handled the rollout of new license plates and the annual renewal of auto tags. She faces Republican challenger Jeff Jacobs. Juvenile court judge, back to those judicial races for a second. This is a rematch of the 2014 contest between incumbent juvenile court judge Dan Michael, who won the office 8 years ago, and his challenger, and that would be Tarek Sugarman, who's a Memphis City Court judge. Again, this is a nonpartisan race, as all of the judicial races are here. What else to look for? What else is at stake? A Memphis referendum that would extend the term limits of the city council and mayor from 2 consecutive terms to 3 consecutive terms, a statewide Democratic primary for Tennessee governor to decide who will challenge Republican Governor Bill Lee in November. The race features 2 Memphis contenders, Memphis City Council member J.B. Smiley Jr. and North Memphis activist Carnita Atwater, along with Dr. Jason Martin of Nashville. Primaries for all 13 of Shelby County seats in the State House and 3 of the 5 state Senate seats that cover Shelby County. And this is the first slate of legislative elections since the Shelby delegation to the Capitol lost a House seat in the once-a-decade redistricting process. Nonpartisan elections for 4 of the 9 seats on the Memphis-Shelby County Schools Board that come against the backdrop of the board's suspension of Superintendent Joris Ray as allegations of sexual misconduct with school system employees are investigated. All 13 seats on the Shelby County Commission are up with a new set of district lines that created a Cordova district, a district that had once been split among 4 county commissioners. In the process, that also created a suburban district that is a blend of East Memphis and Germantown. Last part of this podcast, you know we are all about comparing turnout in election cycles that are up and in front of the public. For our purposes today, we look at the last 2 big ballots. That's 2014 and 2006. Okay, 8 years ago, August 2014, this same election cycle drew a total Shelby County voter turnout of 27%, or just over 145,000 voters. Because primary elections are part of the big ballot, election members do show us that nearly 65,000 of the 2014 voters participated in the Republican primaries on the ballot, compared to 62,000 in the Democratic primaries. The remaining 18,000 or so voters chose to vote only in the general election on the same ballot. Early voting turnout ahead of the August 2014 election day, and including absentee voting, saw 82,403 ballots cast at 21 locations. The early vote in 2014 was about 57% of the total vote. August 2006 big ballot. The turnout here was 27.2%, or 164,400 voters approximately. Most of the primary turnout, 90,260, was in the Democratic state and federal primaries on that ballot, with 42,175 in the Republican primaries. A total of 32,000 didn't vote in either primary, but did vote in the general election. The July 2006 early voter turnout with absentees was around 77,300, or 47% of the total vote. Now, we will remind you of those numbers for comparison over the next 2 weeks as we track daily early voter turnout. We will break it out for stories every few days at dailymemphian.com. And the daily totals will always be on Twitter, and that again is at bdries, DRIES.com. Again, hyperlinks to the ballot and early voting sites and hours as part of our 2 stories on early voting at dailymemphian.com. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.